Thank you. I'm Sandra Stotsky, and I'm very pleased to have had an invitation to provide testimony, which I've written out because I know I have only 5 minutes, and that's not enough time to address all of the issues that need to be addressed. To begin with, I noticed what the department put out as 10 frequently asked questions, and I'm disappointed that their answers are all partial truths. I can't go into any of them because there's not enough time. But I have provided my testimony.
If you comment later, please feel free to send that to us.
If you ask questions about any one of them, I'd be happy to answer. I have provided testimony which does address most of them, but it would require people reading through the testimony. I've made it available on many sites because I happen to be a reader and a writer, so it's there. Most of the questions could be answered by the material I provided. But let me say first that I'm here not to validate a public hearing for a decision that has apparently already been made, but which few parents and other citizens know about. I say that, and I offer Appendix B in my written testimony, which I believe you all have a copy of. And I'm referring to Superintendent Lupini's letter to the Brookline School Committee in June 2014, indicating that the decision to go with PARCC had already been made. He's chairman of the State Superintendent Association. So apparently this was a done deal as far as he was concerned in 2014. I'm here, this is sort of a paraphrase of Julius Caesar, as you can understand, that low-income students in Massachusetts will not get a better education in ELA than they now receive, whether the state uses PARCC tests, which are based on Common Core standards, or continues to use MCAS tests, which are based on the 2011 Massachusetts ELA standards. The 4 designated lead writers for this 2011 document are not qualified to write ELA standards or a curriculum framework. They have no teaching experience with English. There are details in my testimony. The pre-Common Core and pre-2011 ELA standards, which were chaired by David Roach when he was a superintendent in Millbury, and the MCAS tests based on those early standards did help to improve low-income student achievement, mainly because the tests were developed and revised by the state's English teachers. They also used paper and pencil. They were fully released to the public every year for inspection, and the state also set its own pass-fail scores. They were approved at the time James Pizer was the chair of the board. This is seeing faces in different positions at this point. These standards, the pre-Common Core and pre-2011 Massachusetts standards, and the test items for all of them up through 2007 can be found in Appendix A. I was able to find them all. Always asked for evidence for claims starting in '97. They asked for complex literary texts, for a division between informational and literary texts in grades 1 to 6. We were ahead of the curve in all respects, and we moved the needle for low-income students because of the focus on literary texts that the state's English teachers wanted. Their position was that this was the appropriate emphasis in a set of standards and in the tests. And there is a document available to show what the state's English teachers at that time voted for MCAS. But despite the improvement that we have seen for all students under the pre-2011 and Common Core standards and tests based on them, apparently the board, the commissioner, the Department of Education are committed to these standards, the current ones, to test based on these standards, which are supported by reports from organizations that have been funded by certain corporate interests and I've spelled that out in my section of my testimony on the MBAE and Board of Reports. It should be clear what has been supported by one particular foundation, and you should simply have a skeptical eye about reports that are funded, or even fellows that may be funded by that particular foundation. Let me get to the content of the PARCC test, because that was to be one of the major focuses of this hearing. I spent hours looking at the sample test items. You have to understand that they're not released, so we don't know what the actual test items are. I've asked several times for permission to read them, couldn't get any permission to read the actual test items. All I have to go on, and I'm an academic researcher by training, are the sample or practice items. All I can tell you is that I was baffled by the format for Part A and Part B, the multiple choice questions, which may be what is being referred to by some of the superintendents and others here. The format drives what I would call a textual scavenger hunt in reverse. I can answer questions about it later. The problem with PARCC's multiple choice format exists in Smarter Balance as well, so there was coordination behind the scenes. It's not unique to PARCC. The questions in Part B are poorly worded, confusing, tedious, unfriendly to children, and cumbersome. The language level of the selections overall, and remember I'm referring only to sample and practice items because I had no access to actual items. The reading level was at least one grade, if not more, behind in reading level compared to what had been in older MCAS test items. That's my area of expertise because I have studied under someone who was called misreadability. So I understand how to look at the reading level of literary selections or informational selections. And indeed, selections that are on PARCC for 10 and 11 can be found in grade 8 in MCAS years ago. This is a huge difference. Again, we don't know what's actually going to be on PARCC because it's been withheld from us. And we may never see them because they're in a computer. So my recommendation, which is at the end of my testimony, and I have a number of them, doesn't matter what you call the test. I'm not interested in the name. First of all, you should have fewer grades tested, maybe just 4, 8, and 10. We don't need more than that because we have teachers who know how to figure out whether kids can read or write. I know what well-trained teachers.
So I'm ignoring the clock again.
Good.
I'm almost through. I have a minute left.
That's fine. I'm just going to admonish everybody here, we have to leave at 8. So if you want to lengthen it with applause or otherwise, I think it's disrespectful to the current speaker and those who would like to follow. Because I know there are many here and many who don't want to be heard. Who want to be heard but won't be heard. So just sit on your hands as much as you can so we can get as much input as possible.
I'll speak fast.
Oh,
I think
okay. That was on me. That was my minute. I'll give you one more.
Thank you. First of all, we need a test that has a Massachusetts determined cut score, not a cut score across 9 states that includes states that really aren't at the level of what we're doing here in Massachusetts. We need test passages and questions chosen and reviewed by Massachusetts English teachers. We need tests that require less time for preparing for and teaching to the test. I've been speaking to teachers and kids. We need to retain the grade 10 competency determination for high school diploma, which was required in MERA for the benefit of low achieving kids. We need all or most test items released every year as MERA requires, so outsiders can actually see what their kids are being tested on. This is also important for teachers who I know in Massachusetts use these test items regularly to help their kids practice a little bit what was, and could tell what was needed in their classrooms. We need paper and pencil tests, not computer-based tests, and fewer grade levels tested, which is what I began with. 4, 8, and 10 is enough. That was what was in the 1993 MERA. It was also in the 1994 authorization of ESEA under the Clinton administration. Those 3 grade levels, one for each educational level basically, are enough to give us a handle on what kids need to know and how well they're doing, in addition to teachers' own observations. And I know that good teachers can tell whether a kid is reading or writing up to grade level. This is not a difficult thing if the teacher is trained appropriately. Thank you.
Thank you. One question. Do you think we should do no online testing, that there's no computer-based testing that's suitable, or do you just have concerns about how it's implemented?
The costs are extravagantly enormous, and they're unnecessary. I'd rather put that money into teacher salaries.
Introduce yourself.
Oh, great. My name is Jim Pizer. I'm Secretary of Education. I apologize for being late. I have 2 questions. One is you talk about the reading levels being lower, and you cite a couple of examples from high school test or a 10th grade test. We've heard testimony at the elementary level that seems to be the opposite, that the lexile levels of the passages and some of the words are too challenging or too far above the grade level being tested. Did you look at the elementary?
I looked at the elementary with respect to PARCC mainly, and the question answer format. I did not have actual test items. This has been the problem all along. I could only go with what was given as sample of practice items. What I could use were the old MCAS items because they're all released. So I know what we tested kids on. And I put in a few examples on one of the pages of my testimony because I do have plenty of note paper. I took down all these notes, but can't put all of that into 5 minutes worth. But for example, the Red Badge of Courage was tested at 10 or 11, and it was on an old grade 8.
So maybe now that the test has been administered, maybe you'll be able to see more questions. But it would be great to get your take on the elementary grades.
The elementary grades, though I didn't have the time to start checking, comparing reading levels. I had been on the grade 4 committee. So I knew what the reading level, by the way, was for grade 4 because I had helped to select the passages and had battles with the people on that assessment committee because we wanted a higher level of reading than some of the members on that committee. But when I looked at grade 3 for PARCC, the reading level is lower. However, the questions are more difficult, which raises a different question. How close does it become an IQ test at that level? When the questions are so cumbersome and difficult to understand. I spent hours trying to understand how to answer a grade 3. I called a few people to say I didn't understand why it was taking me that long to answer a grade 3 or 4 reading test. But the syntax of the questions was so difficult, I can't imagine what a young child would do. I wrote some of them down. I have them here.
Okay. So that would be good to see. Also, again, if over the course of the next month or so, whatever, maybe if you have a chance to look at some of the, do some more deeper comparison on the elementary level, that would be great.
If they would send them to me, I would have given them my advice. Jeff Nellhouse knows me well. If anybody had asked me for advice, it would have been given free. I've been giving my advice free for 6 years. And nobody asked for it. Jeff knew that. I always said I'd be happy to help out. I always have. I've answered every question for nothing. I don't need the money particularly. But I would give my advice to make sure that kids got a better test. But no one's ever asked for my feedback, and I've asked Don Hirsch, Edie Hirsch, whether he's ever been asked, because I know him well, he's a literary scholar.
Well, I'm asking for some now, so.
And he's never been asked either for his advice, which puzzles me.
So I just asked the second part of the question. So you talked about the textual scavenger hunt. One of the features, if you will, that the authors of the PARCC test talk about is the close reading of the texts that are offered, and that the assessment is designed to evaluate. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about this approach to reading, this approach to textual analysis, and the extent to which it is sort of consistent with your sort of approach or perspective on how students should be taught to read.
I wouldn't want to say anything about how students should be taught to read a literary text, because there are disagreements among literary scholars. I'm only one of many, and I would leave it to a range of literary scholars. But the problem with Part D, we have to really look at Part D in relation to Part A. Part A, not consistently, but often asks for an answer to a question that reflects the child's reading comprehension. You can't answer it unless you understood the passage. And what Part B does, which is why I called it a scavenger hunt after thinking about what was going on here, is that it asks the child to find the words, hunt for the words in the passage that formed the basis for the thinking that went into the reading comprehension in Part A, which is bizarre because it's got nothing to do with reading comprehension. You're simply finding words in the text. You know, find the paragraph, find the sentence. I give examples in here of a lot of the different in grade 3. You know, I do it for every grade level, but there wasn't any way I was going to have the time for it. But Part D is what I find problematic. And I at one point wrote to Jeff and asked if there was a developmental psychologist who advised them. I don't know. There must have been some psychologist who thought this might have been metacognition as it's called, or critical thinking. I have no idea what it was, but it wasn't either. You're looking for words in a text that back up what you already understood. That was the basis for your understanding to begin with. It's bizarre. I don't understand it. It's not a reading test. And I wouldn't even call it a thinking test either. I mean, it's not either reading or thinking. I don't want to go on. It's just that I spent hours trying to figure out what was going on with Part B in relation to Part A. And it was on smarter balance, so obviously there had been some coordination. And somebody must think, with some theory behind it, that this is a way to assess kids. But I don't know. I called several people, some psychologists, cognitive psychologists. I know a lot of people in the academic field. And I said, show me the literature. What are the best studies on A, B, and C? I could get no help whatsoever. So unless I could speak to people in the testing company to find out where they got this theoretical framework from, I can't tell you what the reasoning behind Part B is in relation to Part A.
Thank you. Thank you both. We hear from three